this doesn't seem to be dying down with another rally taking place.
Well, it won't die down for a very simple reason. This is a movement that's been growing over the last 10, 15 years. This is a movement that's garnered a lot of speed and momentum over the last 3 years, more specifically since September 2015 as a reaction to the policy of Angela Merkel to open Germany's borders to refugees. And this is very much a rallying cry. This is a situation where a lot of people who don't necessarily agree with violence, but nonetheless feel that there's that grievances can be expressed through that movement right now is coming out. They're supporting it, so I don't see it dying down very soon. It's actually going to pick up even more steam.
It's going to pick up speed. And your reaction to what you just heard our correspondent talking about, investigation into police ties with the far right, how deep do they run?
Oh, that's a huge question. That's been in this decade, it was actually raised for the first time following the explosion and the arrest of the explosion and the death of 2 members of the Nationalsozialistischer Untergrund, also the National Socialist Underground, a far-right terrorist group that killed 11 people over the course of almost 20 years, 15 years actually. And there were a lot of questions about how police handled these cases, some latent racism, a lot of bureaucracy, a lot of passive reactions to it. And over the last couple of years, especially in Saxony, we've seen situations where police operations had been tipped off by police officers, by special forces personnel. So I wouldn't say, it's unclear how deep it runs, but there's enough support within security forces, at least in East Germany, for it to be a very serious concern.
And how does public opinion feel about it? Because there's even a second probe now into a police investigator who prevented a TV crew from filming him attending an anti-Merkel rally.
Yes, well, that's difficult to gauge because, of course, the media reaction on this has been gigantic. But when you speak, if you go around the cities, the different streets of Germany, and you talk to people and you speak to friends and networks, you realize that there's actually more support for that man than would seem. And so I think one of the biggest issues right now is that there's a latent discomfort, a huge amount of frustration towards the policies of the government. There's a huge amount of insecurity. Whether or not it's justified, that's another issue, but the feeling is there nonetheless. And as such, even if the media reaction seems to be big as a counter movement to it, within the population itself, there seems to be more support for the actions like the man from the LKA a week ago, or even what's occurring this week in Chemnitz.
Yeah, because in those clashes that we saw between far-right supporters and left-wing counter-demonstrators on Monday, we saw flags of the AfD party, the Alternative for Deutschland, which had entered parliament last year for the first time, a Eurosceptic party, which says it's not far right. Can you connect the dots between neo-Nazis and the AfD?
Actually, very simply, during the 2013 campaign, the NPD, which is actually the neo-Nazi party, actually complained that the AfD was stealing too much from its program, and actually had a campaign saying vote for the original. So that's how deep and how important it's actually grown. It's very well known that a lot of AfD members were former NPD members, are people that are known within far-right extremist circles. So there's definitely a huge connection there. Within the AfD itself, there's a huge crisis and huge conflict as well between some that approve of these methods and those that try to be a bit more moderate. But it's very well known that the AfD harbors a lot of far-right supporters.
Yann Saint-Pierre, on Wednesday, a report came out talking about the crying need for more people to join the workforce, particularly in the western part of Germany and the industrial heartland. You have, on the one hand, those fearing immigration, and then business leaders crying for more workers to come. Are you feeling an increasing polarization where you are on this?
Absolutely, it's there. A lot of people, and that's the paradox of it all, is that there's no rational debating about this. Again, on one hand, there's a need for the workforce. On the other hand, the rhetoric is people are stealing our jobs, while everybody can have, the unemployment rate in Germany is very, very low. There's always demand for more workers. But again, the impression that the threat is coming from outside, that the insecurity is coming from outside, a lot of that it's no longer rational, regardless of the numbers. A lot of there were numbers published last week saying again, well, most refugees have found a job now in Germany. They're actually well integrated. They're part of the workforce. That it doesn't translate emotionally towards the German population, and as such, that polarization, which is anything but rational, is indeed increasing.
So how do you explain it?
Well, I think, again, over the years, it goes back at least 15 years, that there's a sentiment among huge portions of the population that they're no longer heard. And again, that sounds very familiar. We've heard it in the US, in the UK, in many different countries, that there's a huge gap between the so-called decision makers and the elite and the rest of the population. And that's been no different in Germany. A lot of people that support these movements say that they're not benefiting from the success from Germany's growth, that refugees are actually stealing the resources and not doing something about it. And that's a discourse that, again, progressively increased over the last decade. And worse, it's been, for various political reasons, it's been appropriated, co-opted by a lot of mainstream parties that try to get that edge, that 2 or 3% more that would give them a majority somehow, and they fueled that impression that yes, Germany is very insecure, and it played into the hand of people who would support more extremist ideas. So we're talking about a process that's inscribed in the very long run, that's very emotional, and as such, yes, as long as it's politically exploited the way it is right now, it's not going to end soon.
Security consultant Yann Saint-Pierre, always a pleasure. Many